So if it's not the way you look that makes you an offender, then maybe your genes are to blame. Well, in the 1960s, it came to light that a small proportion of the male population had a genetic abnormality that made them XYY rather than XY. And these men were thought distinct in terms of physical and mental traits. So they tended to be tall, have long limbs, facial acne, mild mental retardation, and exhibit aggressive behaviour. It gained notoriety when it was claimed by some researchers that the presence of XYY was associated with violent crime. So the basic idea here was that XYY males had twice the Y, and so twice the aggressiveness. Early research found that XYY men were overrepresented in the prison and special hospital population, and that these men had a propensity to high levels of violence. Now, the potential impact of such a finding was incredible, because if it were true, these men would be dangerous all of their lives, because they were genetically propelled to be violent. So, some researchers advocated screening, while others argued that these men were not responsible for their crimes as they didn't choose to commit the crimes. They had to. Such reasoning was not much comfort to some, however, like Stefan Kisko, who was wrongly convicted of murder of an 11-year-old girl by the British court in the mid-1970s, mainly on the basis of being XYY, and it took him 15 years to win release from prison. XYY's story is interesting, not because it's true, but again because of the way that the public and the media reacted to it. Reminiscent of the reaction to Lombroso's work, the public seized on the idea that criminals were genetically different from non-criminals. Later, more comprehensive research found the XYY karyotype to be far less interesting than initially speculated to be. It turns out to be relatively common, with 1 in 1,000 boys having it, and this 47th chromosome causes no problems for most, with 95% of men who have it unaware that they actually have it. Further, later research carried out by researchers like Witkin and colleagues in 1976 concluded that while XYY males were more likely to be involved in crime, they were no more likely to be involved in violent crime. A long-term follow-up study published in 2012 confirmed this, and this study attributed the high conviction rate of these males to societal disadvantage. But maybe there is a genetic element to criminality. There's been a lot of research done in this area, all of which has attempted to determine the magnitude of the genetic contribution to the propensity to engage in crime. One of the most recent pieces of research was published by Kendler and colleagues, examining the contribution of genetics to criminal behaviour. Now, in that analysis, they also looked at predictors of violent and non-violent crime, but today I'm just going to focus on the overarching category of criminal behaviour. So they considered data from a Swedish nationwide adoption cohort of over 18,000 adoptees, over 79,000 of their biological relatives, and over 47,000 of their adoptive relatives. They looked at the biological parents' criminal behaviour and the criminal behaviour of full and half siblings. Now, understandably, they do some very complicated analysis. However, the take-home messages from this analysis are that genetic risk factors do play a role. So, they looked at criminal behaviour and subtypes of this as an outcome variable, and alcohol use disorders, drug abuse and psychiatric illness as genetic predictors. And of all of those genetic predictors, they found that just 2 came out as significant in predicting engaging in criminal behaviour. They were parent-sibling criminal behaviour and alcohol use disorders. But environmental risk factors were also important. So they looked at factors in the adoptive family, including adoptive parental divorce, hospitalisation, and/or the death of an adoptive parent. And they found that within the adoptive family, disruption of the parent-child relationship through divorce or death or parental illness was a positive predictor of risk of criminal behaviour. And these factors did not interact, or rather they were not moderated. So risk of criminal behaviour from disruption was the same for those with a high or low genetic predisposition. So it seems that some criminality can be inherited. But given that criminal behaviour is socially constructed and therefore changes across time and between countries, what is it precisely that is inherited?